was born in a poor village during communism. Our possibilities were completely limited. I grew up with my grandmother on my mother's side. I was the first child. I was a wanted child, from what my parents told me, as well as my brother, who was born 2 years after me. I had an almost happy childhood, or at least I thought so until I grew up and realized that some things are not exactly as they should be. Dad, almost all his life, had great pleasure in alcohol. He often beat us, without necessarily having any fault. I remember how one day, my father entered the house and suddenly started cursing my mother. He was hungry and he asked for some food. My mother gave him soup. He ate some few spoons and he said that the soup was disgusting, and he put the bowl on my mother's head and started beating her. Although I was simply terrified in my mind as a child, one day I wanted to somehow help my mother. He took me and threw me out into the yard, locked the door, and continued to beat my mother until he was fed up. We were crying by the door and begged him to stop, but he didn't care and didn't even listen to us. This wasn't just one of the incidents, there were many more in the meantime. Grandma, whenever she had the opportunity, she loved to make us happy. She worked as a nurse in the village, and when he got paid, he always bought us sweets and chocolates. I went to school in the village, from the age of 7 to 10, in a mixed class with a maximum of 10 to 15 students of different ages and grades. We walked 16 kilometers daily, through the forest, whether it was cold, hot, raining, or snowing. And so the years passed, and I finished high school, but in my father's view, women did not need much education, because they can become much smarter and will start to believe that they are equal to men. Right after I finished school, I got a job at the range. During that time I met a boy, and not long after that, we decided to get married. At the age of 19, I became a mother for the first time. I was very happy and tried to be the best mother for my children. At the age of 21, I gave birth to my second daughter. Everything was going as well as possible. I felt fulfilled and happy until my husband also started drinking and I took the first beating. Time passed and I gave birth to 2 twin girls. After 2 months my husband had gone to work abroad. When the twins were a year old, he returned to the country, but he only stayed for a few months, during which I became pregnant for the 4th time and I became a mum with 5 children. On the phone, I was always cursed and humiliated by him, in such a way that I felt like a nobody. I turned off the phone and without realizing it, I found some strong pills in which there were about 6, 7 pills and I swallowed them all. My first daughter found me after 2 hours in bed foaming at the mouth and immediately called my mother-in-law, who called the ambulance. When I recovered, I didn't feel very well in that hospital, and especially since 5 children were waiting for me at home, so I decided to run away from the hospital. When I entered the gate of my house, immediately the police came and they asked me to accompany them to the hospital again. On the way to the hospital, my husband called me. He started to insult me again, saying that I cheated on him, and now for fear of him finding out, I wanted to commit suicide. Fortunately for me, one of the policemen heard the whole conversation and asked me if I was okay and if my relationship with my husband is in trouble. I told him why this happened, and because of that, I came to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital again, the doctor started arguing with me, saying that he is disappointed about what I did. He kept telling me that I made a big mistake and that I would be very sick, which is what happened as a result. In some hours I started to feel so bad, and I lost consciousness. I was in a coma for 2 nights and 3 days. I woke up on the 3rd day, and after I woke up, I asked a nurse to charge my battery a bit and I called the home number directly. The children were at school and I spoke to the mother-in-law, who assured me that the children were fine. Then, because I had a few missed calls from my husband, I decided to call him back. In the first phase, he seemed worried, but immediately he started with the accusations. A few days later, I asked him when he was coming home because I wanted to talk. He understood what I wanted and started talking to me with nasty words, and that I must have found someone and that I want to leave him. I hung up the phone and didn't answer him for a few days. Then he sent me a message saying that he was sorry because he wasn't close to me and that he was coming home to save our marriage. In May he returned home. The next day, it was his birthday, so we decided to make a barbecue and celebrate with some close friends. At one point, he realized we didn't have mustard, and he said he was going to buy it. He went to the store, and after about an hour seeing that he didn't come, I called him. I noticed that his phone was switched off, and then something lit up in me. Something was going to happen. In the evening he called me and I realized that he was in a bar, because I could hear the noise and the noise of the gaming machines. He told me that he will send someone to give him some money, and I told him that I will not give any money to anyone. He started cursing me on the phone, He said, "Who am I so I don't give him his money," and things like that. I hung up the phone, bathed the children, and put them to sleep. Then I also had a bath and I was sitting in the living room with my 12-year-old daughter, watching TV. She fell asleep in the meantime, and when I was getting ready to take her to her bed, my phone rang. My husband told me to go out and talk. I told him that I'd go out and to come inside so we can talk. I didn't even have time to put the phone on the table, and immediately I felt a blow, after which I fell down. I asked him why he was hitting me, during which my 12-year-old daughter woke up and started yelling at him, like, why is he drunk and hitting me? I took my daughter and we went into the bedroom and locked the door. My daughter took the phone from my hand and she called the police. In 10 minutes, a police team arrived, and he, seeing this, ran into the garden. When the police arrived, I told them what happened. I asked the policeman to take me and the children to my parents. They told me that it was too far and that they were not allowed to leave the city area, but because I kept insisting that I didn't want to stay there anymore, I woke up the children and took them and went to a center for people without the house where we stayed that night. I left the house in my pajamas, only with my passport in my hand and my phone. The children fell asleep quickly, although they were also somewhat scared, but tired. I was very scared and I was making plans in my mind. My husband kept calling me, so I hung up the phone. By morning, I opened the phone and had many calls and messages from him. In some messages he threatened me, in others, he apologized and asked me to forgive him and promised me he would change. He didn't know where I was and decided to call everyone to find me. Just before I went home to my parents, my husband came through the door. I panicked a lot. Luckily the parents saw him entering. I asked him nicely to leave, and he insisted on letting us talk, but I told him that I didn't want to talk to him and to leave. Then he started talking with ugly words. At that point that my mother got angry and gave him out the door and called the police, but until the police arrived, he disappeared. I couldn't sleep all night and I kept thinking about how to get rid of him and this whole situation. We had two options. I should move to my parents' house, but my father was there, knowing that he has the same problem with drinking, and my children will still be unhappy anyway. The second option was to move to another city with rent and take all from zero, and start a new life. So I started looking for a rental, but because I had 5 children, no one wanted to receive us, for fear that they would damage something in the apartment or things like that. In the end, I found a studio apartment that was very small, but I was very happy to have a place of our own. I found a job close to home, my children were going to a new school, and everything was perfect. I divorced and decided to start a new stage of life. At my work, I had a colleague with whom we sometimes met outside for a coffee, but I can't say that we had any kind of relationship because he was going to leave the country and we had decided not to get emotionally involved. It's just that our plans didn't coincide with what God had decided. Right after Christmas, exactly a few days after he left the country, I found out that I was pregnant. Being shocked, I didn't even know how to tell him, so I wrote him a message in which I told him the news. He replied that he was not interested and that he could send me some money to get rid of the child. Also through a message I answered him and told him that I don't need his money and that I will keep the pregnancy. I gave birth to a boy who looked a lot like him. After the pandemic started, I almost lost everything, my job, I had no money also to pay the rent, and I was forced to leave the rent because I hadn't paid for some time. Alone with 6 kids and a big shame on me, I asked for help from foreign people to help me. I was in a deep depression about my situation, especially for my kids. It was so hard at this time because I didn't have a choice. But fortunately, I met good people with a big hurt who helped me find rent, helped me with finding a job, with the food and the kids. But I still can be proud of myself and my family. Now I am a free, happy woman and mother.